Hello, this is Del Denny of TBC Action Coach of Indiana, and I want to welcome you to the Indiana Business Spotlight Series. The purpose of the series is to promote small businesses, because when small businesses succeed, well, we all succeed. And I have a special guest. We have Jeremy. Jeremy, welcome to the Indiana Business Spotlight. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Now, Jeremy, you have an interesting business here, but before we jump into the business, I want to learn a little bit more about you. Jeremy, tell me your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Myself, I am a co-founder and the CEO of Argona Partners. But a little bit more kind of just about me personally. I really love spending my time helping entrepreneurs focus on the passion behind their business, why they started their business. So that's really, what from an entrepreneurial spirit standpoint drives me every single day. Um, what I really enjoy just kind of outside of, the business aspect of everything is I work on music, amateur music producer. I'm obviously an avid comic fan, big Marvel fan. Shouts out, hopefully they sponsor me. And then I have a husky as well, so spending a lot of time with my dog. But from that perspective, just trying to balance that work life essentially.
Fantastic. Now, tell us about your business, Argona Partners. If you had to do like a 60-second commercial on what you guys do, what would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Argona Partners is a strategic consulting and startup development firm. What we focus on is providing all of the right resources, the environment, and the ecosystem to really accelerate growth for early stage companies as well as startups. Really, what we are built to do is we're built to drive transformation. Whether that's the utilization of different business methodologies such as lean and agile, or utilization of design thinking. What we look to do is we look to take a very scientific approach without losing that human touch of everything.
Nice. So, you kind of touched on this a little bit. Startups. Who is your target customer? Who do you look for in a customer, a client?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at from a company perspective, typically we work in sustainability or social impact. Those are typically the two sort of industry segments that we work with. And then from a sort of a growth standpoint, typically what we'll work with is either a pre-accelerator or a post-accelerator, sort of how to get into an accelerator, how to get out of an accelerator. From another standpoint to look at it is sometimes we'll work with pre-seed. Otherwise, what we typically work with is anywhere from seed to series B.
Okay, very cool. So let's say I have a business idea. I've got a software program, an app, whatever it is, and where would I go from there? Like, how would you help me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it starts with understanding what are you working with? What is the opportunity here? So for us, it starts a lot of understanding the opportunity within the market. So a lot of market research that goes into these ideas from the get-go. So that way you're not building something that is just constantly being built and updated. You're building something that is real world. It's something that has been tested, is true. One of the worst things, especially with software development, is when you go into a project thinking like, yes, I'm going to build this perfect app, spend, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000 building this app. 3 months later, you launch it. Turns out it's not what the users want. And so from that perspective, it's more of a lean sort of a methodology sort of perspective. But what we really believe is in understanding what is the market opportunity. How do we go about that? Not just from a testing or usability and interface standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint as well, because that's what a business is, right? Not just a business plan in terms of what's the marketing strategy, but how much is that marketing strategy going to cost? What is the purpose of it, et cetera, et cetera. So we really find these sort of a pro formas as being the business plan in numbers.
Okay, very nice. Now, how the business spotlights came about was really the product of COVID and, and the pandemic and all that stuff. A
As so
lot
many things, right?
as so many things. You saw businesses, folding, you saw them pivoting. Tell me about how did it affect your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that it affected our business with obviously is kind of networking. And so because of that, a lot of what I do specifically is talking to entrepreneurs and working with founders. And so part of that was I mean, obviously a lot of that was significantly changed as far as networking goes. Um, with that kind of in mind, we definitely were able to take a different approach to it. Obviously, there's a lot of digital transformation going on, but that's not just within our own internal company, that's with a lot of other companies as well. So it came down to a lot of understanding of, it's not just our company that needs to pivot, it's a lot of other companies that need to pivot as well. So that's where we were able to, lean into what was happening as far as the environment goes, as far as, having to deal with this shutdown. So we were able to really drive into the market with a force that we hadn't driven into the market before. So it was an interesting opportunity. It definitely took us a couple of months to adjust, as it did a lot of people, just because regulations and everything like that weren't necessarily set right away. And so for businesses, it was very hard to operate. So it was difficult, I'd say, for us to sort of adjust as necessary. And I think that gave a little bit of a insight for us into how to operate with a back plan or a backup plan, right?
Oh.
So that was something that we also dove into as well, as far as approaching the market with, okay, like, how do you come out of this? What do you do after you come out of this? And of course, that approach didn't work right away because that wasn't on the front of people's minds. It was digital transformation. And then how do you get out of this?
Gotcha. Now, you made a good point. Like everyone was trying to figure it out. Like it was new to everybody. No one saw this coming for the most part. They say that smart people learn from their mistakes, but wise people learn from the mistakes of others. Now, it's pretty much business owners that watch this interview, right? Um, we all made mistakes. We all learn from them. What are some learning lessons that you've had in the last year or so that you might be able to share with other business owners?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say from an operations perspective, just making sure that everything is set up for smooth communication channels. The way that I like to look at things is it's better to experience speed bumps than it is to hit a wall, right? So when you're experience, this is kind of goes into the concept of software development as well, but getting just something out into the market to test, right? So when you're going and you're testing these things, it's not going to be an optimal user experience. You're going to run into these speed bumps, but those speed bumps are going to help you actually control the road, right? You're going to be able to actually understand the moves that you need to make. You're going to be able to understand how to scale these operations without having to just rush into it. All of a sudden you have explosion and now you can't operate. Now you just can't function properly. I think that a good example of sort of the flip side of this is depending on which kind of business you were running. If it came down to like shipment and some sort of those operations, at one point in time there was just no availability of containers whatsoever. Like all of those containers were gone. And it obviously drove the price extremely high, right? And so, how are small business owners supposed to take advantage of this? One example that I have is a buddy of mine who had basically like agricultural growing medium, right? Like soilless growing medium. And so he was dealing with this process of, okay, how do you go about, like, I don't have product, I don't have inventory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we decided, what we thought was the best idea is, okay, how do you implement yourselves into these communication channels where you can start to develop the brand, right? Like you don't have the product yet, but you do have the information, you do have the data based on, all the testing that they had done because of what their product is. So they go about this process essentially of implementing more of a branding campaign, obviously still dealing with the operations issue of supply chain, but now bringing it back to the perspective of, okay, how do you change, how do you adapt to this issue that nobody's ever dealt with before? And it really comes down to, okay, how do you bootstrap? How do you take what you have, utilize that resource in order to get other resources, et cetera, et cetera. So through that sort of a campaign, they definitely had opportunities to talk to some big box stores and hardware departments and stuff like that, right? And so they took the opportunity really to sit back and say, okay, let's push the brand. Let's make sure that people understand who we are, what we do, and then we can push the supply. So it was a little bit. It's a very interesting strategy, right? Because that's a very bootstrapped methodology where it comes to, okay, how do you operate based on that capital, right? If you don't have any supply, what you sell et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want, yeah, you'll have to get me on a second interview for the rest of that story, but don't want to take up too much time. But from a perspective of how do you pivot in a time in a crisis of nobody's ever experienced this? What does a backup plan mean? It's a really interesting perspective to take, and it really comes down to analyzing the derivative of the issue, and then from there you can grow.
Beautiful. Now, let's say I needed help growing. I wanted to reach out to you. Where do I find Argona Partners?
So the easiest way to go is to argonapartners.com. And then the easiest way to engage is to take advantage of our complimentary strategy session. So you'll get me for an hour or one of our other expert consultants. And we'll just sit down for an hour and just kind of discuss maybe an issue, a bottleneck, or even an idea that you're having. And we can really strategize around what are you facing, and then what are the action steps to be taken from there.
All right, fantastic. I got two more questions for you. Number one, you said you're a Marvel fan. Who is your favorite Marvel character? And
Well, if you can make out any of the comics in the background, they are all themed around symbiotes. If any Marvel fans are listening to this, they know. But otherwise, so Venom, the character, is really the main instance of a symbiote. But I don't want to get too nerdy or anything like that. But it's essentially an alien race. Is my favorite concept in Marvel. But Stanley is for sure, a legend in my eyes. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but that would be, the question of if you could meet anybody in history, that would be my answer.
be Stanley, huh?
It would
Okay,
be
very good.
Stanley.
Next question. What inspires you the most today?
Absolutely. I think what inspires me, every day is really being better than yesterday, and that's something that's been said a lot. But to me, life is all about gaining knowledge, right? So I'm a firm believer that if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm not going to learn anything. So for me, it's what opportunities can I create in order to better myself, and not just better myself, but gain more knowledge. Because that knowledge is something that I can share. Then I become a smart room and a person for somebody else, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. And that's just how, from an entrepreneurial perspective, that's how we work together.
Fantastic. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the Business Spotlight. Well, we appreciate all your words of wisdom. This has been great. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. This concludes our interview of the Indiana Business Spotlight. Thank you.